Hello everyone, welcome to Regulatory Rewind Live, episode number 7, or in this instance, 007, for all those James Bond fans out there. Hope everyone's doing well, and it's good to have everyone here. I just want to take this chance to quickly remind you, as always, that we are all lawyers on Reg Rewind, but we're not your lawyers, unfortunately. So none of what we're about to discuss is advice, legal or otherwise. And this week, we're going to be doing a deep dive into decentralization. And that follows the results of a poll we shared earlier, and decentralization won with almost 50% of the vote. So looks like a lot of people are interested in decentralization. So over to Gustav to kick off our deep dive on decentralization. Gustav?
Thank you, Jamil. Yes, so as Jamil mentioned, we want to go into decentralization a bit, and to kick it off, I first wanted to dive a bit into what is the web, what is Web3, what's the differences. So we had the Web 1 when the internet was born. That was rather static, and you could have a website or you could write an email, but there was no real interaction between players. And then when the Web 2 came, a lot of people hoped that this would be somewhat a next stage of liberation of people to really connect on a worldwide level. And we saw that somehow happened. But the way it happened over the last years, we could see that people are in central positions making decisions about algorithms, about what to see, what to not see, how and if to censor. And we have a lot of interference that's probably not based on a democratic view, but more on a view of what do you want to have on the platform happening for your own success, for the advertisements that you post, et cetera, et cetera. So the idea about the Web3 is to really go the next step. And this next step is based on decentralization. So decentralization in that context means that not a CEO of a company or a board of members, whoever is sitting on top of such centralized entities, is making decisions for you, but that people are empowered to make their own decision, that they are given a secure net that they participate in, where they act on a decentralized manner to really own the stuff that they're using as the base for their interaction. When we look at the key elements of blockchain technology, we see that there's a strong technical basis on P2P networks, cryptographics, that are used in a way that information is immutable, that it's transparent, and that it lives on distributed ledgers that make it even more immutable, because if a country decides to not allow any kind of interaction with a blockchain technology anymore, then people can, through the internet, still get all the information that was saved on the blockchain before. And we have the smart contracts that are automatic execution of code whenever a set of rule happens. So that's basically very, very soft, the base of distributed ledger technologies as such. When we look at decentralization from the perspective of computation, we have to understand that there's always a network of nodes, and the more nodes and the higher the diversity of these nodes is, the safer it gets. So it's this is true in regards to block creation, to where those nodes are standing, who is behind those nodes, and also the diversity of data availability to make sure that the data is always there, even if someone is disrupting the service from someone. And additional to these rather technical prerequisites that we need to find, we also have other factors of decentralization that are super interesting to watch, because they always also give us an extra view on decentralization of the whole entity, or community project that's behind it. So we have, for example, how is the decision made on what's being developed? How is that funded? Is that a decentralized decision making? Is there a governance system to make those decisions, and do those decisions automatically, for example, pay out money to developers who said they want to do something? Another side is the accumulation of value and IP rights. We do have tokens that increase or decrease in value, somewhat connected to what the community does, how the technology is used. And we have IP rights that are also accumulated in the community, so you can just grab it and use it for yourself. And in general, we have a system of high usage, participation, and accessibility to the public. And last but not least, also businesses are finding out that decentralization is something that will reshape how businesses make in general. So that was the technological and business background a bit. I now want to go into jurisdictions, how we are talking about regulatory stuff. So how is that all related to regulation? And I want to start with DAOs, with decentralized autonomous organizations. These are organizations that you can fill with any content that you want. It's just an infrastructure. So you can use it as a company, you can manage common goods with it, you can organize a common work project and create something, you can create software, you can invest in something, you can have roles of people who are experts who help to make the decision in the governance. The key thing about DAOs is that they are meant to be really decentralized. So a lot of people make decisions in a very democratic way, and the decisions that they made are made autonomously from the founders of the project, or autonomously from certain interactions that have been done. So, for example, there's a token, and everybody who has a token makes the decision together. That's what the DAO is about, and that's super interesting. From it's a completely different way to organize oneself, and the question is, how does that interact with regulation? Because we know that regulation is normally based on a jurisdiction, meaning I'm, for example, in Germany, so probably German law is applicable for what I do. But if you're not based in a country anymore, but if multiple players who have decision-making powers without one being the one making the decision, the question is, why do we need any interaction with jurisdictions at all? And of course, there is an answer to that. So, for example, if you have consumer rights or liability, there will always be some interaction with laws of the place that something happens, be where your consumer is, or be that some hack has an impact on someone. So to be really on the safe side, especially when the project is not super decentralized yet. So you always have a state where you have a group of initiatives, and then over time you get more and more decentralized. And when you're still on the way to decentralizing, it might be helpful to find a legal structure around such a DAO, which we call a wrapper, because then basically the legal system is wrapped around the DAO, and the legal wrapper acts like something like an embassy on the ground, talking for the DAO. For example, if you want to rent an office, or if you want to have an employee and really have them in a system. So there are all kinds of different DAO wrappers that you can read up to. I linked one of the articles that's very good about it in this slide. So, for example, there's a Wyoming DAO, but there's also all kind of foundations that are based in different countries that are crypto and DAO friendly. And these are things how you can protect your DAO in that state when it's still growing and when it's still being decentralized. that you make sure that all the liabilities and all the legal things that you want to get in place are structured in a way that you and your team are safe. So that was the DAO side. Next, I'm giving over to Eva, who's going to talk a bit from the US side.
Thanks, Gustav. So absolutely fascinating, hopefully really useful context on decentralization from a philosophical perspective, and also in terms of organizational perspective from the DAOs and regulation. So what I'm going to talk about is the US and the context of decentralization in some of the hot topics in regulation or lack thereof in the US, specifically the SEC and its many actions and why decentralization or the definition of decentralization matters. So first up is the Howey test. So a lot of you may already know about the Howey test. This is taken from a slide around regulation that was presented by Chrissy, Angie, and Josh at Decoded 2023 in Copenhagen. I think that's publicly available, so you can go and have a look at what what we were saying at that time. And the Howey test is essentially why the Howey test is important. Is if you apply the Howey test, then a token could be considered a security. If it does not, if it doesn't fall within the Howey test, then it would not be considered a security, and it would be regulated as if it was a commodity instead. So this is the key test, whether a token is considered a security and is then therefore regulated as a security under the remit of the SEC. And this is the test that would have been used on many tokens, including Solana, Cardano, and Ripple. And the latest news, just about an hour ago, is that the SEC has dropped its case against Ripple, that it was not going to pursue classifying it as a security and regulating it as a security. So that is pretty hot news. And why decentralization? Well, okay, so the SEC has specifically said that if the blockchain is highly decentralized, then it cannot be the case that it would meet each of these criteria, because there isn't a single entity that would be controlling or driving all of this together. And that's why decentralization matters. And it's been a volatile time for understanding what is considered to be decentralized and what isn't, with the lack of regulation around this. And this slide that's being shown here is from a speech that was made by one of the directors of the SEC at the time from 2018, where he said, and this is the quote, "If the network on which the token or coin is to function is sufficiently decentralized, where purchasers would no longer reasonably expect a person or group to carry out essential managerial entrepreneurial efforts, the assets may not represent an investment contract and therefore would not be under the SEC remit." However, that was something that was said in 2018, and it was then unclear whether certain securities would fall under that category or not. And the actions that the SEC took particularly around 2023, would suggest that it is unclear if that statement was something that token issuers could rely on or not. And in 2024, there have been a number of bills that would seek to clarify whether a token is a security or not, and that would include FIT 21, which there should be a screenshot coming up shortly, which is called the Financial Innovation and Technology for the 21st Century Act. And it tries to set out a new regulatory framework. I think quite a few of you would have heard about this already. But it sets out a new list of criteria, and it is unclear at the moment what would happen to FIT 21 in the new administration. And the test that it contains includes a 20% control or 20% ownership test. So it goes to the same point of not having a lot of control, having open participation and limited ownership concentration. And this FIT 21 would have meant that if the tests were passed, then it would fall under the CFTC's jurisdiction as a commodity. So it depended on that definition of decentralization. Now, what's happening this week is pretty exciting because under the new administration, there is a new crypto task force, which is meeting this Friday to talk about how to define securities. And by this time next week, we'll probably know quite a lot more about what this might entail. I think I'm going to pass on back to Gustav to talk about the EU.
Yes, thank you, Eva. So talking about defining securities, I want to highlight that in the MiCA that we, I think, mention every time, but it has a lot of potential to be mentioned. In recital 22 of the MiCA, it states that regulation applies to all persons and undertakings involved in crypto asset services, including decentralized services that use an intermediary. And that means that on the one hand, if you use an intermediary, you even if you're fully decentralized, you're still underfalling the regime. And on the other side, it means that if you manage to fully decentralize, then you're not under MiCA, which is probably good news. The problem about it is that the MiCA doesn't really tell us what fully decentralized means. And we know from what we've seen from a lot of projects that decentralization is a continuous process that gets defined by the things that happen in other projects because you get inspired and find new ideas. It's a thing about growth, how big is the community, how many people are voting, and all these things. So it's really hard to define what this fully decentralized means under MiCA. So I guess everybody has to be afraid, even if they are decentralized, that they should take measures to ensure that they are not too hard against the MiCA in whatever they do. So that was the European side. And with that, over to Jamil, who's going to talk about Africa.
Thank you, Gustav. So Africa has the highest percentage of entrepreneurs, well, one of the highest percentage of entrepreneurs in the world and the highest percentage of female entrepreneurs of any continent. And it's also got a young and fast growing population. So against that backdrop, the world's second largest continent, within the world's second largest continent, DAOs hold a significant potential to transform various sectors by promoting transparency, inclusivity, and innovation. So there's a few examples of this that I've found when looking into this. There's a DAO called Timbuktu DAO, which focuses on building a sustainable future through Web3 technical education in Africa, offering free initiatives like boot camps and workshops and hackathons. There's also a NDAPI DAO, which aims to unite Africa through a sovereign blockchain. And what they're trying to do is establish a decentralized foundation for economic self-determination, allowing communities to govern their own digital infrastructures and financial systems. There's also potential for DAOs to facilitate diaspora investment, which is quite a big thing in Africa as well as Asia, with quite a high level of remittance to countries like Nigeria. So DAOs can be useful there in terms of facilitating infrastructure projects back home for the diaspora of Africa. So I think with that, we're going to see more. I think DAOs are poised to revolutionize Africa potentially by providing decentralized platforms for Africa's advancement and driving sustainable development. It's estimated that by 2028, Africa's blockchain market is expected to be worth somewhere around $135 billion US. And that's said to represent almost a third of the entire blockchain market at that point in time. Obviously, there will be challenges to navigate, both generally, as we've looked into a little bit in this deep dive, but also challenges that might be specific to the continent of Africa that may emerge. But the potential of DAOs to connect the vast entrepreneurial spirit of Africa, working towards collective goals, will spur on its people and will be interesting to watch in the coming years. So with that, I want to give it back to Gustav.
Yes, thank you. We were thinking when we talk about decentralization and regulation, we also want to give a fantastic use case for it. And we found Polkadot. As Eva mentioned, the SEC used to say that if you're sufficiently decentralized, you're not under the SEC jurisdiction anymore, which means that you're not a security anymore. And when that was announced, the Web3 Foundation, at that time acting on behalf of Polkadot, got in touch with the SEC, who invited them to continuous talks that were happening over a time span of probably 3 years. And in that time, the SEC changed and their views on what is a security and what is not changed, and also what is called a no action letter, a letter that would say you are not under the jurisdiction because you're not a security, was not given by the SEC. So after 3 years of intensive discussions with the SEC, the Web3 Foundation went to an unusual step and announced that from the discussions that they had with the SEC, even though the SEC was not willing to give them a no action letter, they would be sure and confident that the DOT is now merely a software and that it is not a security anymore. Because the SEC normally, they investigate and they would come after you if you are a security and don't act like a security. The Polkadot, the Web3 Foundation did it the other way around. They were being compliant with every law in the US about securities on the one hand, and on the other hand, talking to the SEC and showing them how decentralized they are and how the software is really, the DOT is really a part of the software now, and it's not just an investment into something that you would profit from. And this also led to the Web3 Foundation, or Daniel Schönberger at that time, to speak in front of representatives and on the one hand show how Polkadot is compliant with everything, on the one hand is decentralized on the second in the second step, and asking for more and clearer regulation on the case to make sure that projects don't have to go to that length of discussing and arguing with authorities, and then in the end not getting any proof of or clarification for their status in regards to the laws. So that was the Web3 Foundation innovative way to get the self-attested no action letter.
I think that's right, Gustav. So when we track all of these SEC cases that were happening in 2023 and 24, and earlier this year when the SEC started dropping its cases against Binance and Coinbase, etc., those cases in 2023 listed like up to 60 tokens, and never did they once mention DOT. And I think that was a significant omission. So it's worth saying that. And I wanted to, off the back of that, we're still talking about decentralization. A really great slide that is quite a good visual on just showing how decentralized Polkadot is the slide that comes up in Sean's talk very often. So this one was taken from ETH Denver, where Sean talked about Polkadot and the latest developments. And this is based off of the Nakamoto coefficient. And you can see that Polkadot, by using these certain metrics that are available on nakaflow.io, I think it's called, it changes daily. And in fact, the next slide will show you that the number has actually increased. We're at 167 now. So Polkadot is incredibly decentralized and incredibly resilient. I think there's so much flux and change happening in the US at the moment that we are very happy that we can have these sessions on a weekly basis to talk about what these latest changes might be. And I think this Friday's meeting could be quite interesting. I think it's worth mentioning also, we're going to run out of time today, but decentralization, DAOs, what we haven't touched upon in great detail is governance of DAOs and the liability of DAOs. So I will just quickly mention two cases which a lot of people will have heard about. So there's Lido DAO last November and Uki DAO from the year before, which has implications on DAO membership and liability and governance. So we could potentially do a deep dive into that another point in time, but definitely worth mentioning that DAOs, governance, decentralization, they all tie in together. I'll pass it back over to Jamil.
Thank you very much, Eva. And yeah, I hope this is what people were expecting on our decentralization deep dive. As you mentioned, Eva, we could potentially do a dev liability deep dive and look into some of those cases you mentioned. If there's anything else people want to see related to decentralization or other topics entirely, please let us know in the comments, and we can do a poll in the future as with last time. So that's everything on this deep dive on decentralization. We hope let us know if you want to see anything else. Thank you for joining us today, and take care, everyone.